Bureaucracy number 2. I've made 2 videos about bureaucracy because, while the concept is important in classical sociological theory, there are different ideas about what the most important characteristics of bureaucracy are. In video number 1, I outline the original points as written about by Max Weber in his ideal type for bureaucracy. This video contains the points that I personally think are the most important characteristics of bureaucracy, so it's a little bit of my opinion. If you're using this video to help you with a class, then you should pay attention to what your book says. Each one-on-one book textbook that I've looked at shows a slightly different set of characteristics for bureaucracy. And it's important to understand what your professor thinks are the most important characteristics. But anyway, this is my view on bureaucracy. The most important characteristic, I think, for bureaucracy is the presence and predominance of rules, regulations, and procedures. There's policy manuals, there's staffers whose entire job is compliance to these rules. Everything that happens in a bureaucracy is governed by rules, regulations, and procedures. The second point is the presence of formal hierarchy. This is important because while every social grouping of any kind has some kind of hierarchy, right? Some people have more power, some people have less. The way that hierarchy works in bureaucracy is unique to bureaucracy and characteristic of it. The first point is that the positions within a bureaucratic institution exist independently of individuals. So if you work a job in a bureaucratic institution, as most of us do, if you get promoted or you quit or you get fired or something else, if you leave that position still exists. When you leave it, a vacancy opens up that another person can come in and fulfill. One of the interesting characteristics of modern institutions generally is that they tend to take a life of their own that's separate from the people who occupy them, who work in them. The people come and go, but the positions, the institution, the bureaucracy itself still exists. The next point, again, is the presence of rules and procedures. Every position within the bureaucracy, from the very top to the very bottom, is governed by rules and policies and procedures. This is particularly important in the relationships of power. So a person who's higher up can't simply, on a whim, get rid of a person or a group of people lower down. If they want to fire someone or hire someone new or something like this, then there is a prescribed method for doing so. Their use of power, their performance of their own individual job and role within the institution is governed by rules and procedures. With each position in the hierarchy, there's a set of technical skills that go with it. The position indeed exists to perform specific tasks, and hopefully, in the ideal, the person who occupies that position has the technical skills to do that job. And this leads us into the next point, aside from hierarchy. Bureaucracies ideally are merit-based. So your position and your movement, your promotion or demotion within a bureaucracy is not based on who you know or who you're related to or how well people like you, but it's based primarily on technical skill and your ability to do the job. Now, of course, we know that doesn't happen, but again, we're talking about the ideal type, not the messy things that happen in real life. Professionalism. This is an interesting idea that's best understood in contrast with previous kinds of social institutions, what we might call pre-modern institutions. The idea here is that your work life, the job you do, is separate and distinct from your home and personal life. Now, we call this being professional, but it's an interesting characteristic of modern society and modern bureaucracy. In past institutions, who you were at work was often very connected to who you were at home. There was no separate home and work life, whereas in our society today, this is very, very important. If you are too personal at work, you can actually get in trouble because there's rules that govern what you can and cannot do at work. The next point is efficiency. We often criticize bureaucracies as being inefficient, and this is a problem that they do have sometimes. The point here is not to say that bureaucracies are characterized by efficiency, but rather they are characterized by their focus and goal of efficiency, often at the expense of other goals. So a bureaucratic institution is more interested in accomplishing a particular technical task than they may be about a value or a moral principle or some other thing. Efficiency, whether or not the bureaucracy actually achieves it, is a primary goal that characterizes and shapes the way bureaucracies function. A high specialization and division of labor. I talked about this a little bit here when we talked about hierarchy, but the basic idea here is that every position within a bureaucracy, from the very top to the very bottom, has a very specific task. And sometimes the specialization in a bureaucracy is so intense that people working right next to each other don't understand the jobs that each other are doing. And this can make sometimes replacement or efficiency very difficult. The last point, the last characteristics of modern bureaucracies is the importance of record keeping. Record keeping is so important that there are often entire departments devoted to this task. We often talk about the paper trail or computer files, for example. Most of what IT does in a lot of big institutions is just manage files and records. Everything that a bureaucracy does, as part of the rules and regulations that govern it, are written down and recorded. Everything they make, the money that comes and goes, the people who are hired and fired, so on and so forth. Record keeping is a distinguishing feature of modern bureaucracy. Now, let's just go to a couple of the pros and cons associated with bureaucracy. There's lots that we could talk about. This is a big debate, but I'll just go through a couple of them really quickly. Pros, efficiency. Bureaucracies may not seem efficient in our experience with them, but if you compare them to previous kinds of social organizations, we find that they actually are more efficient than other alternatives. Particularly as an institution or a nation, a society gets larger and larger. Because positions are independent of individuals, bureaucracies tend to be stable and are able to exist quite well from generation to generation without a lot of problem. They tend to be more fair. Hopefully, with the governance of rules and procedures, people are treated equally, both within and without the bureaucracy. They also have technical superiority over other kinds of institutions. Because there's a focus on rules and technical skill, better work tends to be done. Goal displacement. Goal displacement means that basically that the rules and the procedures of the institution become more important than the work of the institution itself. So if you're at a university, for example, and you try to talk to the registrar or some other kind of office, you may find that the people in that office feel like following their procedures are more important than you getting your education. And this is an example of goal displacement, where the overall main goal of an institution becomes replaced by smaller internal goals based on rules and procedures. The iron cage is a really important concept in sociological theory. Again from Max Weber, and there'll be another video about that later. But essentially what this means is an excess of rationality. The thing that makes bureaucracies fair can often make them very impersonal. People often feel like they're trapped in a cage of rules and regulations. Poor accountability. Because modern bureaucracies are large, because tasks are spread out and highly specialized among a wide variety of individuals, when something goes wrong, it can be very difficult to pin the blame on any one person or on all of the people who should properly be accountable for it. So one person may take the blame for everyone else, or nobody may take the blame at all. If you look at the 2008 financial crisis, for example, there were probably thousands of people who contributed to this, but only a very small handful of people actually were punished for it. And many people suffered who had nothing to do with it at all. Wastefulness. One critique of bureaucracies is that because they are so large, because they're focused on record keeping and rules, sometimes more than other things, they can be very wasteful. And then, of course, all of this leads to the feeling and the experience that we often have of bureaucracies being very inefficient. The effort to follow the rules can sometimes silly when it seems plain to you what needs to be done right in front of your face. And so we often feel that they're very inefficient. Anyway, a few of the pros and cons of bureaucracy and the points that I think are the most important. Again, if you're using this for a class, you should pay attention to what your professor thinks is the most important, because that's how you're going to get the grade ultimately. Thanks for watching.